The ocean had always whispered to Dr. Eris Thorne, but in recent years, its voice had become a fever dream. From his cramped observatory clinging to the basalt cliffs of a forgotten Hawaiian cape, he listened not with his ears, but with instruments that were extensions of his soul. Hydrophones trawled the abyssal plain. Seismometers charted the planet's churning guts, and spectral analyzers tasted the chemical soup of the deep. For a decade, ever since his spectacular, career-ending fall from grace, Aris had been a man in exile, watching a single spot on the globe, the Mariana Trench. He wasn't watching for earthquakes or new species. He was watching for a god to stir in its sleep. He called it the Hadal Anomaly, a name that tasted of academic folly and personal ruin. It was a point of impossible heat, a source of exotic energy signatures that defied geology, a place where the Earth's mantle hummed a song that was not of this world. He had once proposed, in a boardroom filled with the steel and glass confidence of the Geodyne Corporation, that they were not drilling into a geothermal vent, but into the skin of a living, dormant organism of non-terrestrial origin. They had laughed. Then they had fired him. Then they had scrubbed his name from every research paper he had ever co-authored, creating a ghost in the machine he had helped build. But Eris kept watching, because he knew the whispers were growing louder, evolving from a murmur to a word. And soon, that word would be spoken to the entire world. The first syllable was uttered on a Tuesday. Eris saw it not as a sound, but as a color. The satellite feeds of the Pacific, usually a swirling canvas of blue and white, began to bloom with a ghostly, aquamarine luminescence. It started as a faint tracer around the Philippines, then bled north towards Japan and south to the coast of New Guinea, a vast, supernatural aurora igniting the Twilight Sea. The news called it a Noctiluca bloom, an unprecedented algal event. Eris knew better. Algae didn't pulse in perfect synchronicity across thousands of miles. Algae didn't emit low-band radio frequencies that made the hair on his arms stand on end. This wasn't a bloom, it was a birth announcement. He watched, his knuckles white on the edge of his console, as the light intensified, and the first reports trickled in from coastal towns, fishermen speaking of crystalline, jellyfish-like creatures that floated not in the water, but a foot above it, and of a strange, melodic vibration that seemed to come from the water itself. In a sterile conference room 40 stories above the New York skyline, Kaylin Vance watched the same feeds with an entirely different kind of dread. As CEO of Geodyne, she commanded the energy that powered the modern world. For 50 years, her company had been the quiet god of the grid, their monopoly built on a secret buried 7 miles beneath the ocean. They called their technology deep core tapping, a sanitized lie that masked the reality of a drill bit latched onto an impossible power source. The Hadal Anomaly. Vance had inherited the secret, the infrastructure, and the burden of keeping it. The bloom, as the media was calling it, was a complication she could not afford. It was a symptom of the anomaly's instability, a fever-breaking. Her engineers were already reporting catastrophic energy fluctuations from the deep-sea siphon, causing rolling brownouts in Geodyne-powered cities from Shanghai to San Francisco. The public could forgive blackouts, but they would not forgive the truth. She smoothed her perfectly tailored jacket, her face a mask of corporate calm as she addressed her board. It is a previously undiscovered extremophile chain reaction, triggered by subtle tectonic shifts, she announced, her voice resonating with practiced authority. Geodyne is allocating its full resources to containment and study. Our deep core operations are being temporarily throttled to prevent any further ecological disruption. It was a masterpiece of misdirection, a lie wrapped in the comforting language of civic responsibility. But as the board members nodded, she was already texting her head of security, a man with a face like a closed fist. "Find Thorn now. He cannot become part of this narrative." She knew Eris Thorn was the only other human alive who understood the true nature of the beast they had chained. And in her world, knowledge that could not be controlled had to be erased. Eris felt the pulse just after midnight. It wasn't a tremor that rattled the windows. It was a concussion of the soul. One moment he was staring at his monitors. The next he was gone, flung across space-time into a river of shared consciousness. He saw a cosmos of dying purple suns and shattered worlds, felt the cold silence of a long, lonely journey through the void. He felt the impact, a searing entry into a young, volatile world of water and fire. He felt the descent, burrowing deep into the planet's flesh to hide, to sleep, to gestate. He experienced millennia in a single, gut-wrenching instant, the slow dance of continents, the rise and fall of ice ages, the quiet, patient dream of rebirth. He saw Geodyne's drill piercing the outer shell of the sleeping god, not as an act of malice, but as the ignorant sting of an insect, a parasite latching on. Then his vision snapped back, the smell of ozone sharp in his nostrils and the metallic taste of blood on his tongue. He was on the floor of his observatory, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a message, a memory. The anomaly wasn't just a creature, it was a seed, a world ship, and its long dream was ending. The bloom wasn't a side effect, it was the first stage of terraforming. The planet was being prepared for what was about to hatch. His phone rang, a number he hadn't used in years. It was a former colleague from Geodyne, a low-level analyst who owed him a favor. "Eris, they're looking for you." The voice whispered, fraught with panic. "Not a lawsuit. Internal security. The kind of people who don't leave a paper trail. They just cleared your name from the old server archives. They're making you a ghost." The line went dead. Eris knew he had hours, maybe less. They weren't coming to ask questions. He had to get to the trench. He had to see it, to understand what was coming. But he was a pariah with frozen bank accounts and a reputation in tatters. He had no ship, no crew, no access. But he knew someone who did. He found her in a grimy, salt-crusted port on a lawless atoll 1,000 miles from anywhere, a place where shipping containers went to disappear and questions were answered with a knife. Jova Rostova was a legend in the subnautical black market, a pilot who could take a submersible into places navies wouldn't dare. She sat in the back of a dimly lit bar, nursing a drink, her face framed by a shock of short, silver hair. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. She operated one piece of equipment, the Kerberos, a deep-sea submersible that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrap heap and rebuilt with spite and genius. It was ugly, scarred, and the only privately owned vessel on Earth capable of withstanding the crushing pressures of the Hadal Zone. Eris laid out his data on the sticky table between them, the energy readings, the spectral analysis of the bloom, the seismic rhythm that beat like a colossal heart. "Geodyne has lied to the world for 50 years, Eris said, his voice low and urgent. "Their entire empire is built on something they found at the bottom of the trench, and it's waking up. I need to get to the anomaly." Jova traced the rim of her glass, unimpressed. "The ghost of Geodyne. I heard what they did to you. What's in it for me? Your academic curiosity doesn't pay for fuel cells and oxygen scrubbers." "Everything," Eris countered. "When this truth comes out, Geodyne is finished. The data I could retrieve, proving what they've done, would be the biggest payday in history. Corporate espionage on a planetary scale. He saw a flicker of interest in her eyes. Greed, not glory. He could work with that. They're hunting me, Jova, which means we're running out of time. If they're this desperate to silence me, imagine what the secret is worth. She was silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the glowing map of the bloom on his tablet. She had seen the lights from her own vessel, felt the strange vibration through its hull. She didn't believe in sleeping gods, when she believed in secrets. She knew geodynes were buried deeper than anyone else's. The price is non-negotiable, she said finally, a sly grin touching her lips. And I want it in untraceable crypto before we break the surface. My boat, my rules. Your cargo, Thorn. You do what I say, when I say it. Understand? He nodded, a wave of relief washing over him. The partnership was cold, mercenary, and perfect. As they walked toward the docks, the air grew thick and heavy. The low, melodic hum from the sea was louder here, a constant, resonant thrum that vibrated deep in their bones. The water in the harbor glowed with an impossible light, and strange, beautiful, crystalline flora grew like coral on the rusted hulls of derelict ships. The world was already changing. Back in Eris's observatory, the door splintered inwards. Kaylin Vance's security team swept through the room, finding only cooling computer monitors and the lingering scent of sea salt and ozone. On one screen, a single line of text blinked, "You can't erase a god." On the docks, alarms began to blare. A black, unmarked helicopter swooped in from the sea, its spotlight cutting through the humid night air. Jova swore, shoving Eris toward the gangplank of the Kerberos. Looks like your window of time just slammed shut. Get in. Floodlights washed over the dock as armed men in black tactical gear poured out of warehouses. The Kerberos, a brood of dark, pitted metal, looked less like a submersible and more like a sunken cathedral. Jova moved with frantic efficiency, her hands flying across a control panel as the submersible hummed to life. "Cast off the lines," she yelled. Eris fumbled with the thick, greasy mooring ropes as the first shots rang out, sparking off the container next to him. He threw the last rope into the glowing water and scrambled down the hatch just as Jova slammed it shut. The world outside silenced by a foot of solid titanium. With a groan of tortured metal and a surge of its powerful thrusters, the Kerberos slipped from its mooring and plunged beneath the waves, its external lights cutting twin beams through the eerily illuminated water. Eris stared out of the thick quartz porthole as they descended, watching the docks and the running figures shrink away. All around them, the ocean was alive with the alien light, a new creation taking hold in the cradle of the deep. Their journey into the heart of the Hadal anomaly had begun. The plunge was a fall into a new world. Inside the cramped, utilitarian sphere of the Kerberos' cockpit, the chaos of the surface vanished, replaced by a pressurized silence, broken only by the hum of the life support and the creak of the hull adjusting to the immense weight of the ocean. Eris Thorn found himself pressed against a bulkhead, his body buzzing with adrenaline. He watched Jova Rostova, who was no longer a cynical barfly, but an extension of the machine around her. Her hands moved with an unhurried grace across the controls, her eyes scanning a dozen different readouts, her focus absolute. The submersible was her kingdom, and here, 700 feet below the waves and sinking fast, she was its undisputed queen. "They won't follow us this deep," she said, her voice flat, betraying no sign of the firefight they had just escaped. Geodyne's surface fleet is for show. Their real teeth are down here. We'll have to be smarter than they are. Eris nodded, his gaze drawn to the forward porthole. The aquamarine glow of the bloom was still visible, ceiling of impossible light above them. But as they descended, the nature of the water changed. The light was not just a surface phenomenon, it was everywhere. Strange new life forms drifted past the viewport, creatures of spun glass and cold light, moving with a languid, hypnotic grace. They were not fish, not cephalopods, not anything cataloged by marine biology. They were geometric, crystalline, and they pulsed in time with the low, resonant hum that now seemed to be coming from the very atoms of the Kerberos's hull. "It's a symbiotic ecosystem," Eris murmured, his scientific curiosity overriding his fear. "The anomaly isn't just emitting energy, it's seeding the ocean, remaking it." Jova glanced at the sonar, her expression tightening. "It's making it noisy. The water is so saturated with this stuff. It's like trying to navigate through static. I'm flying half blind." She toggled a switch, and a low-frequency pulse emitted from the sub, the returning echo painting a ghostly, three-dimensional image of their surroundings on a holographic display. They were sinking through a forest of the unknown, crystalline structures that resembled trees, miles high, grew from the slopes of the undersea mountains, their branches shimmering with internal light. The sea floor was no longer mud and rock, but a carpet of glowing, moss-like organisms. "This has all appeared in the last 48 hours, Eris whispered in awe. "The speed of propagation is impossible." Jova wasn't listening to his lecture. Her eyes were fixed on a small, fast-moving contact approaching from their stern. "So much for not following us," she hissed. "Geodyne's got a dog in the water, one of their hunter drones." On the display, a sleek, shark-like icon was closing the distance with terrifying speed. "Can we outrun it?" Aris asked, his stomach clenching. Jova let out a short, sharp laugh devoid of humor. "In this rust bucket, it could outrun a torpedo, but we can outthink it." Her knuckles whitened as she gripped the controls, banking the Kerberos hard to the left. The submersible groaned in protest as she pushed it into a steep dive, aiming for a deep, narrow canyon carved into the side of an underwater volcano. "The drone is an AI," she explained, her voice tight with concentration. "It follows predictable patterns. It's fast in open water, but it's cautious in complex terrain. It has to be. At this pressure, one wrong move, and it implodes." She navigated them into the glowing crystal forest, the branches of the alien trees scraping against the hull with a sound like grinding teeth. Eris held his breath, watching the drone's icon on the display hesitate at the mouth of the canyon, then follow them in. The chase was a terrifying, silent ballet in the crushing dark. Jova used the alien landscape as her shield, ducking behind massive crystalline pillars and weaving through arches of light. The drone was faster, more agile, and twice it got a weapons lock, its targeting laser painting a red dot on their hull. Each time, Jova managed to break line of sight just as it was about to fire, sending a volley of supercavitating projectiles streaking into an inanimate crystal tree, shattering it into a million shimmering shards. The hum in their minds intensified with every near miss, and Eris felt a strange, protective instinct rise within him, not for himself, but for the new world they were desecrating with their primitive conflict. The drone was relentless. It learned Jova's patterns, anticipated her moves, It cornered them in a cul-de-sac of glowing rock, its weapon port opening for a kill shot. "Nowhere to run, Thorn," Jova muttered, her face slick with sweat. "Time for a new rule." Her fingers danced across a different console, one that was dark and unlabeled. "What are you doing?" Eris asked. "Something I usually charge extra for." She slammed her palm down on a large red button. From the Kerberos's belly, a massive electromagnetic pulse erupted outwards. Every light in the cockpit died. The engines whined into silence, and for a terrifying second, they were dead in the water, adrift in absolute blackness. Eris felt his heart stop. The drone caught in the blast, spasmed. Its lights flickered and went out. Its propulsion system failed. Stripped of its intelligence and power, it was just a piece of metal, and the abyss was unforgiving. They heard the sickening crunch as it succumbed to the pressure, imploding with a sound that was felt more than heard, a violent shudder that vibrated through the water. A moment later, Jova coolly rebooted the Kerberos' systems. The lights flickered back on, one by one. The engines hummed back to life. "Fried its brain," she said, a grim smile on her face. "Old military tech. Nasty, but effective. Now they know we're not just some scared scientist in a stolen sub." But the victory was short-lived, and the EMP blast had an unintended consequence. In the deafening silence that followed the drone's destruction, the hum that had been a constant background noise surged, becoming a clear, undeniable wave of energy that washed over them. Eris cried out, clutching his head as another vision, sharper and more coherent this time, ripped through his consciousness. He saw not the past, but the now. He saw Kaylin Vance on the bridge of a command vessel, her face illuminated by the glow of a tactical map, her expression one of cold fury. He saw Jidine's entire deep-sea fleet converging on their position, not just drones, but massive construction vessels and 3 heavily armed security subs. The EMP was a flare, a beacon that had given away their exact location. But then the vision shifted. He was no longer seeing through his own eyes. He was looking down at the fleet, at the tiny Kerberos, from an impossible height, with a sense of ancient, weary omniscience. He felt the entity's attention shift from its slow, methodical terraforming to the irritating skirmish happening on its skin. He felt a surge of annoyance. The hum became a piercing mental scream. "They're all coming," Eris gasped, pulling himself back to reality. Vance is coordinating a full-scale assault. Jova was already pushing the Kerberos deeper, her face pale. The sub's sensors were going haywire, flooded by the energy pouring from the anomaly below. "We're almost there," she said. "Wait." Her voice strained. "The trench floor. Whatever is down there, we're about to see it." They broke through the last layer of the crystalline forest and entered a vast, open space. The Hadal Zone. The pressure here was over 1,000 times that of the surface, a force that should have rendered life impossible, yet the water was warm, and it glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. Below them lay not a barren plain of silt and rock, but a sight that shattered every known law of biology and physics. The floor of the Mariana Trench was alive. It was a single, contiguous organism stretching for miles in every direction, a vast membrane of what looked like living tissue, cross-hatched with rivers of golden light that pulsed like a circulatory system. And in the center of it all, at the exact coordinates Eris had been studying for a decade, was the source of the anomaly. It was the Geodyne Deep Core Tap, a monstrous piece of industrial hardware the size of a skyscraper, latched onto the living sea floor like a steel tick. Its massive drills were embedded deep in the creature's flesh, siphoning the golden energy that flowed through its veins. The entire structure was surrounded by a corona of raw power, a heat haze that warped the water around it. This was Geodyne's secret. They hadn't found a new energy source. They had found a god, and they had bled it for 50 years to power their world. My God, Jova breathed, her mercenary cynicism finally evaporating in the face of the impossible. It's real, all of it. As they hovered, watching in stunned silence, a tremor ran through the living landscape. The golden rivers of light began to pulse faster, brighter. The hum in their minds crescendoed into a deafening, soul-shaking chord. From the point where the Geodyne drill pierced the entity's skin, a wave of incandescent energy erupted, a silent scream of light and power. On their tactical display, the icons of the approaching Geodyne fleet blinked and vanished as the wave of energy washed over them, disabling them instantly. The hunters had become the hunted, but the wave was still coming, expanding outwards, a tsunami of pure force heading directly for the Kerberos. Alarms shrieked through the cockpit. "Brace for impact," Jova yelled, her hands flying across the console, trying to divert power to the shields. But they both knew it was useless. They were a speck of dust in the path of an awakening god's rage. The light was all Eris could see as it engulfed them, the world outside the viewport dissolving into pure, white, terrible energy. The world did not end in fire and pressure. It dissolved into light. The energy wave from the Hadal anomaly struck the Kerberos not as a physical force, but as an act of intimate invasion. For Jova Rostova, it was a cascade of catastrophic system failures. Every alarm shrieked at once, a symphony of electronic death before the cockpit plunged into an unnerving silence, the only light coming from the incandescent whiteness that had replaced the ocean outside. She felt a staggering vertigo as the submersible, no longer under her command, was lifted and held by an unseen hand. The machine that had been her extension, her armor against the abyss, was now a powerless cage. And for the first time in her life, Jova was truly, utterly helpless. Her pragmatic mind, built on physics and mechanics, buckled under the strain of an event that had no scientific precedent. She felt an intelligence press against the hull, a mind vast and ancient, and the sheer scale of it triggered a primal, suffocating terror. For Eris Thorn, the experience was entirely different. He was not a prisoner. He was a guest. The light flooded the cockpit and poured into him, bypassing his senses and speaking directly to the core of his being. The pain was excruciating, a billion volts of pure information overloading his neural pathways. But beneath the pain was a clarity that was almost divine. He was no longer Eris, the disgraced academic. He was a single nerve ending in a consciousness that spanned geologic time. He felt the anomaly's own story, a saga of cosmic loneliness and biological imperative. He learned its name, a concept that had no human sound but translated roughly to the planter. It was not a creature of conquest or malice. It was a seed, a biological arc designed to travel the void, find a cradle world, and merge with its nascent biosphere. Its purpose was not to destroy, but to create, to weave itself into the fabric of a planet's life, accelerating evolution, fostering complexity, and ultimately creating a symbiotic intelligence, a sentient world. He felt its arrival, a panicked, wounded plunge into the primordial Earth after a collision in the dark of space had sent it careening off course. He experienced the long, slow dream of its gestation, a slumber that lasted for eons as it cautiously extended its senses, tasting the planet's chemistry, feeling the slow drift of continents, waiting for the right conditions to begin its work. Then, he felt the violation. 50 years ago in human time, a pinprick of agony. He felt Geodyne's drill, a cold, unthinking spike of alien metal, piercing its dormant flesh. He felt the siphon begin its work, not just drawing power, but draining its very lifeblood, the essential energy it needed to complete its transformation. The siphoning was a lobotomy, a slow bleed that held it in a state of perpetual, tortured sleep, its dreams turning to nightmares. The bloom, the terraforming, was not a deliberate act of creation, but a fever-breaking. It was the planner's immune system finally kicking in, a frantic, disorganized attempt to heal a wound that had festered for half a century. And then Eris understood the true, apocalyptic horror of the situation. The planner showed him the feedback loop. Energy Geodyne was siphoning was not just being taken, it was being corrupted by their crude, inefficient technology and fed back into the system as a kind of poison. The planter was becoming unstable. Its gestation was failing. The message was not a threat, but a diagnosis if the Geodyne tap was not severed. The planter's life cycle would collapse into a catastrophic stillbirth. The energy it had stored for millennia to create a world would be released in a single, uncontrolled detonation. It would be a planetary-scale sterilization event, a wave of energy that would boil the oceans and scour the continents, leaving behind a dead, sterile rock. The vision receded, leaving Eris gasping on the floor of the cockpit, his body trembling, tears streaming from his eyes. The light outside softened, returning to the ethereal aquamarine glow. The Kerberos' emergency systems flickered back to life with a low hum. Thorn Eris. Jova's voice was shaky, her face ashen in the dim light. She was gripping the controls, her knuckles white. What in God's name was that? All systems were dead, inertial dampeners offline, but we didn't move. We were just held. It wasn't trying to hurt us, Eris said, his voice raspy, alien even to his own ears. He pushed himself up, his mind feeling impossibly vast, as if his skull could no longer contain it. It was communicating. Jova, we have to stop them, not just to expose them. We have to stop them to save everything. And he began to explain what he had seen, his words tumbling out in a frantic, desperate stream, the planner's purpose, the agony of the siphon, the impending stillbirth that would mean the end of all life on Earth. Jova listened, her initial skepticism giving way to a dawning horror. She looked at the forward viewport. Outside, the seascape had changed. The Geodyne fleet, the security subs, and massive construction vessels floated dead in the water, their lights out, their engines cold. The living sea floor was reacting to their presence. Crystalline structures were growing around them with visible speed, encasing the dead ships in glowing, coral-like prisons. It was a planetary immune response, isolating a threat. 40,000 feet above them, on the bridge of the Geodyne command vessel Hegemon, Kaylin Vance stared at her tactical display, her composure finally cracking. Every icon representing her deep-sea assets had turned from green to a stark, uniform red. "Status report," she snapped, her voice like cracking ice. "Total communications loss with the fleet." An analyst stammered, his face bloodless. "Power failure across all vessels, including the tap. We're completely blind." Vance looked at the energy readings coming from the trench. They were off the charts, an impossible torrent of power that her company had only ever tasted in trickles. Thorn had been right. It wasn't a geothermal vent. It was alive, and they had made it angry. For a moment, She felt a sliver of fear, but it was quickly cauterized by a lifetime of ruthless ambition. She had not built an empire to see it consumed by some mythological beast. If she could not control it, she would kill it. She turned to her head of security. "Initiate Protocol Scorch," she commanded, her voice low and final. The man paled. "Ma'am, Protocol Scorch is a weapon of last resort. The geological models are uncertain. The blowback could fracture the entire tectonic plate." "I am aware of the risks," Vance said coldly. "This entity has declared war on my company, on our way of life. We will respond in kind. Send the targeting data to the orbital platform. I want that thing dead, whatever the cost." Deep in the abyss, Eris felt a new wave of terror from the planter, not a memory, but a premonition, a vision of a threat from above, a line of fire descending from the sky. "It knows," he whispered to Jova. "Vance is going to try and kill it. From orbit. She'll crack the planet in half before she admits defeat." Jova stared at the monstrous geodyne tap structure, still latched onto the heart of the glowing seafloor. The solution was terrifyingly simple and impossibly complex. "We have to cut the cord," she said, her voice grim. "If the siphon is poisoning it, we have to disconnect it." "How?" Eris asked. "We're one sub. That thing was built by an army of machines." As if in answer, a melodic pulse of light emanated from the seafloor and washed over the Kerberos. A schematic appeared in Eris's mind, overlaid with his own memories of Geodyne's internal systems. The planner had spent 50 years connected to the tap. It had learned its enemy's technology, its architecture, its weaknesses. "There's a failsafe," Eris said, his eyes wide with a desperate hope. "A manual override for the drill's core coupling, located at the base of the main conduit. It was designed to be used in case of a catastrophic reactor breach. It would sever the physical connection instantly." A manual override on the outside of a deep-sea drilling platform, Jova asked, her skepticism returning. "That's insane. They never thought anyone could get to it," Eris explained. "It's shielded and protected by automated defense turrets, but the planter has disabled them. It can give us a window." The path was clear, a suicidal run to the heart of the enemy's machine, to perform surgery on a god with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Jova took a deep breath, the mercenary pilot replaced by something else, something harder and more resolute. She looked from Eris's haunt, determined face to the impossible, living world outside. "Get us a map," she said, her hands already moving across the controls, coaxing the Kerberos back to life. "Let's go cut the head off the snake." The small, scarred submersible turned, its lights piercing the glowing water as it began its slow, deliberate approach towards the colossal steel parasite. A single living cell moving to cure a planetary disease. The journey to the heart of the machine was a descent into a silent, alien graveyard. The Kerberos moved like a phantom through the aftermath of the planter's defensive pulse. Geodyne's fleet, once the apex of human engineering, was now a collection of high-tech tombs adrift in the glowing water. The massive construction hauler, the Leviathan, was frozen mid-maneuver, its giant robotic arms poised like a praying mantis that had been flash fossilized. The hunter-killer subs, the Cerberus and Styx, floated listlessly, their weapon ports agape, their engines cold, and all around them, the planter was at work. With a speed that was both beautiful and terrifying, crystalline structures grew over the dead vessels, encasing them in shimmering, translucent cocoons. It was not an act of aggression, but of reclamation. The foreign bodies were being absorbed, neutralized, and turned into monuments of their own trespass. Navigating the wreckage was a nightmare. Jova pushed her skills to their absolute limit, her face a mask of intense concentration. The water was thick with energy and particulate matter from the growing crystal, making the sonar almost useless. She flew by sight, her hands dancing across the controls as she guided the Kerberos through the narrow gaps between a dead sub's conning tower and a blossoming spire of alien coral. "It's a maze," she muttered, the professional calm in her voice frayed at the edges. "And it's changing as we move through it." Eris had become the navigator. His connection to the planter had deepened, evolving from a violent intrusion to a constant, humming presence at the back of his mind. He was the planter's eyes and ears for Orcs, and it was his guide. "Bank right, 30 degrees, he'd say, his eyes closed, sweat beading on his forehead. "There's a structural weakness in the Leviathan's hull. The growth is concentrated there. We can pass through its cargo bay." Jova followed his instructions without question, her trust born not of faith, but of the simple fact that his impossible directions kept getting them through impassable spaces. The cost to Eris was immense. He wasn't just receiving data, he was feeling the planter's agony. The proximity to the deep core tap was like standing next to an open wound. He felt the ceaseless drain of the siphon, a dull, planetary ache that resonated in his own bones. He felt the poison of the corrupted energy, feedback, a psychic nausea that left him dizzy and weak. Several times he slumped in his seat, his nose bleeding, whispering of the wrongness of the energy that Geodyne had twisted into a weapon. High above, in the sterile quiet of space, Kalen Vance watched a countdown timer on a holographic display. The Hephaestus orbital platform, Geodyne's greatest and most terrible secret, had maneuvered into position. It was not a satellite. It was a cannon, a weapon designed to deliver a single, focused beam of kinetic energy capable of penetrating a planet's crust. It was the ultimate deterrent, the final word in any negotiation. Targeting solution locked on the anomaly's primary energy signature. An officer reported, his voice betraying a hint of awe and terror. "Estimated impact yield will exceed 1,000 gigatons. We are go for final sequence." Vance stared at the image of the Earth, a perfect blue marble hanging in the void. She felt no remorse, no hesitation. In her mind, she was not destroying a world, she was performing a necessary, albeit brutal, act of surgery to save it from a non-terrestrial cancer. "Proceed," she said, her voice as cold and empty as the space outside. The Kerberos finally broke through the last of the wreckage and hovered before the base of the deep core tap. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking, a monument to humanity's arrogance. The main drill conduit was a kilometer-wide cylinder of reinforced alloy that plunged deep into the living sea floor, surrounded by a complex network of power exchangers, support struts, and automated defense platforms. As Eris had predicted, the defense turrets were inert, their barrels drooping like wilted flowers, already being overgrown by glowing crystal. But the planter's influence was not absolute. "I don't understand," Eris whispered, a fresh wave of pain washing over him. "The fail-safe mechanism, it's shielded, not just physically. There's a localized AI, a warden program. The pulse didn't reach it. On their screens, a small, heavily armored alcove at the base of the drill lit up. A single, robotic eye, a glowing red lens, swiveled to fix on their position. It was an independent system, a last line of defense, and it was still very much alive. "A welcoming party," Jova said through gritted teeth. "Can the big guy downstairs shut it down?" Eris clutched his head. "No, it's too close to the feedback poison. The warden's systems are isolated, but the planter can't get a clean grip on it. Any direct attempt could cause a catastrophic energy spike. It's a stalemate." The red lens of the warden AI pulsed, and a high-frequency beam lanced out. Not a weapon, but a targeting laser. A countdown appeared on their console display. Unauthorized vessel detected. Destruct sequence initiated. T-minus 5 minutes. "There's no way to hack it from here," Jova said, her mind racing. "The shielding is military grade. We'd have to physically interface." Her eyes darted to the EVA suits locked against the rear bulkhead. "No," Eris said immediately. "You'd never make it. That thing will fire the moment you leave the sub." "It's not going to fire," Jova countered, her expression hardening with desperate resolve. "It's going to be distracted." She looked at Eris, her stormy eyes locking onto his. "You're its link to the planter. Can you talk to it? Can you get its attention? Yell into the void. Thorn, do whatever you have to do. I just need 30 seconds to get to that panel." Eris felt a cold dread wash over him, but he saw the Stark Bay, undeniable logic in her plan. He was the only one who could create the diversion she needed. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and plunged his consciousness back into the overwhelming river of the planter's mind. This time, he didn't just listen. He pushed back. He focused all his will, all his fear, all his desperate hope for survival, and screamed a single, coherent thought into the abyss. "Look at me!" The warden AI's red eye flickered. Its targeting sequence wavered. In the sudden chaos, Jova blew the outer hatch. Encased in a bulky, armored EVA suit, she launched herself from the Kerberos with a burst from her maneuvering jets. A tiny, fragile figure against the colossal backdrop of the drill. She was a bullet aiming for a keyhole, the fate of the world resting on her shoulders. As she rocketed towards the alcove, Eris convulsed in his chair, his mind locked in a silent, titanic struggle with the machine. He could feel the warden's cold, alien logic probing at him, trying to dissect the impossible ghost that was screaming in its systems. Aboard the Hegemon, the final countdown reached its end. "All systems nominal," the officer reported. "Awaiting your final authorization. Director Vance." Kaylin Vance looked at the clock, at the red icons on her tactical map. She thought of the empire she had built, the order she had imposed on a chaotic world. It was all worth it. She raised a hand, her voice unwavering as she gave the command that would seal the planet's fate. "Fire." The command was given, a single word spoken in the sterile vacuum of orbit that was a death sentence for a world. On the bridge of the Hegemon, Kaylin Vance watched as the primary charging sequence of the Hephaestus platform engaged. There was no sound, no violent shudder, only a silent, terrible gathering of power. A lance of pure white energy, colder and brighter than any star, began to form at the weapon's focal point, a needle of annihilation aimed at the heart of the planet. Down in the crushing dark, 7 miles below, the world fought back. Jova Rostova was a fleeting specter of white armor and desperate fire, her maneuvering jets sputtering as she pushed the EVA suit past every safety limit. The Warden AI's red eye flickered erratically, caught between its prime directive to defend the tap and the psychic ghost screaming in its core logic. The targeting laser jittered across her visor, unable to maintain a solid lock. Stray bursts of plasma from its secondary defenses sizzled past her, boiling the water in their wake. She had seconds. The alcove protecting the override loomed, its access panel sealed shut. She didn't slow down. Bracing for impact, she slammed into the panel feet first, the kinetic force of her suit shattering the maglocks with a sickening crunch. Inside the Kerberos, Eris was being unmade. His mind was no longer his own, it was the battlefield. He felt the cold, geometric consciousness of the Warden AI trying to excise him like a virus, while simultaneously feeling the immense, wounded presence of the planter pouring its will through him. His body was a conduit for a force it was never meant to contain. Blood streamed from his eyes and ears, his limbs convulsing uncontrollably, but he held on, focusing the entirety of his being, the sum of his life, his knowledge, his fear, into that one desperate, defiant scream, "Look at me!" Jova's gloved hands found the manual release lever, a primitive, heavy piece of metal designed to be pulled with the force of a panicking human. It was frozen with 50 years of disuse and pressure. As the countdown on her HUD entered its final 10 seconds, she wrapped both hands around the lever and pulled, her muscles screaming in protest, the suit's servos whining at maximum torque. High above, the Hephaestus fired. A perfect, silent line of obliteration crossed the void, striking the atmosphere with a flash that was visible from the far side of the moon. It punched through air and cloud and water, a pillar of pure energy superheating a column of ocean into steam as it descended upon the Mariana Trench. 9 seconds. The metal groaned. 8. A hairline fracture appeared at the lever's base. 7. Eris felt the beam's approach as a wave of absolute, final heat, a cauterizing agony in the planter's mind. 6. With a final, desperate roar that was lost in the water, Jova put the last of her strength into the pull. The lever snapped. The emergency bolts holding the drill coupling fired with explosive force, and with a shudder that shook the very foundations of the sea floor, the deep core tap was severed. The physical connection was broken. The siphon was cut. The feedback loop was shattered. For Eris, the moment of severance was an apotheosis. The sudden absence of the feedback poison, the Warden AI's corrupting influence, meant the floodgates were opened. The raw, unfiltered consciousness of the planter, a billion years of cosmic knowledge and biological purpose, surged through him in its purest form. His scream of pain became a gasp of utter, transcendent understanding. He saw the intricate, beautiful mathematics of life itself, the architecture of creation. He was a man, a planet, a star. And then he was nothing at all, his mortal mind sublimating into the vastness it had touched. A final, perfect integration. His body went limp in the command chair, a single tear tracing a path through the blood on his cheek, a quiet, profound smile on his lips. He had become the bridge. He had crossed over. The orbital beam struck. But it did not strike a wounded, poisoned creature. It struck a god unshackled. The energy did not detonate. It was caught. The living seafloor lit up, the rivers of golden light pulsing with impossible brilliance. The beam, a weapon of ultimate destruction, was drawn down into the planter's core, not as a killing blow, but as a meal. The energy it had lost over 50 years was returned in a single, violent instant. Kaylin Vance saw it on her monitors. A direct hit, followed not by a seismic event, but by an energy reading that climbed into infinity. The anomaly signature didn't vanish. It swallowed the weapon's yield and swelled, 1,000 times more powerful than before. Then the unthinkable happened, and the telemetry from the Hephaestus showed a reverse energy flow. The beam had not dissipated. It was still connected, and the power was now surging upwards. From the trench back to the platform, her ultimate weapon had become a straw. An vengeful god was drinking from it. Her final moments were spent watching her own sterile, perfect creation turn against her. The white light of the planter's purified energy flooding her bridge before the entire orbital platform vaporized into nothingness. Adrift in the abyss, Jova watched the world be reborn. The light from the sea floor was blinding, a sun igniting in the deep. The severed head of the deep core tap was tossed aside by a surge of growth as the planter began to truly heal. Its crystalline structures now forming with breathtaking speed and complexity. The dead Geodyne fleet was not just encased, but deconstructed. Its metals and alloys broken down and woven into the new, living landscape. She was out of fuel, out of options, a castaway at the bottom of the world. She looked at the dark viewport of the Kerberos and knew with a cold certainty that Eris was gone. But as she floated, waiting for her oxygen to run out, a gentle, irresistible force took hold of her, a current that was not water, but will. The Kerbero, its hull now laced with fine, glowing crystal filaments, was lifted from the seafloor, and her own limp, suited body was drawn with it. She was brought to the sub's outer hatch, which opened with a silent, graceful motion, and deposited safely inside. The journey to the surface took hours, a slow, solemn ascent through a transformed world. The ocean was no longer dark, but filled with a soft, internal light. The strange, beautiful life she had seen before was now everywhere. A vibrant, complex ecosystem that pulsed with a single, harmonious rhythm. When the Kerberos finally broke the surface, the sun was rising. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, but the ocean was a color it had never been before, a shimmering, living aquamarine from horizon to horizon. The world's power grids were dead. Its economies were shattered. Its old gods of industry and capital were fallen. Humanity was adrift, vivace, humbled, and afraid. But the planet was alive in a way it had never been before. Jova stood on the scarred hull of her submersible, the only human witness to the end of one age and the dawn of another. The low, melodic hum was still there, no longer a whisper of a sleeping god, but the clear, resonant song of a world awake, a symphony of symbiotic life. Eris was gone, but he was also everywhere. She could feel him in that song, a single, clear note of human curiosity and sacrifice, now woven forever into the voice of the sea. The ocean had a new story to tell, and she, Jova Rostova, was its first listener.